Wow. Good morning. This light is really bright. I don't know if Ryan's going to be standing here, but anyway. Already doing technical interventions. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Wilson, Vice President of Human Resources, and it is certainly my pleasure to welcome you to our third annual leadership event entitled Leading Across Generations. The next 3 days we have wonderful speakers. You're about to hear from one. We have sessions planned, panels, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to attend as many of those sessions as your schedule permits. I want you to know, though, that all this was made possible through the hard work of a very dedicated committee, and I'd like to recognize them now. So if you're here, please stand. Azetta Beatty, Patrice Carroll, Sonja Feast-Price, Melody Flowers, Steve Ivey, Natalie Lindgren, G.T. Lineberry, John Nash, Yanira Paz, Christy Peters, Lissa Pohl, Stephen Testa, and Bill Verbal. Thank you all for working so hard. Enjoy your next 3 days. Next, I'd like to turn it over to our provost, Dr. Tim Tracy.
Try not to mess up Ryan's slideshow here. Thank you, Kim, and it's great to be here with you under, as you said, this bright spotlight. This is going to be pretty interesting. Again, it's good to be here with you on this somewhat rainy but warm fall afternoon or morning. The theme of today's conference is really timely. This fall we enrolled the first class of Generation Z students. Yes, we remember the Millennials and Generation X and Generation Y, and we're already in Generation Z. They're the first completely digital generation, and they use a smartphone more than they do a laptop. They expect that everyone is listening to them all the time because they're listening to each other all the time. They're very entrepreneurial, yet despite want to be listened to all the time, they don't want to be tracked on social media. So it's a very different generation. This forum is focused on the fact that today, 5 generations are navigating our campus. Think about that. 5 generations of people, the boomers, the millennials, X, Y, and Z, are navigating our campus, and except for the Z and maybe Y, several are in the room today. So more than ever, we need to think anew about the systems that we create to bridge across and support the UK family. And so that's what you all are doing over the next 3 days. As a university, we're rethinking how we support student success. And you've heard me talk many times about the 4 pillars of student success: academic success, financial stability, belonging and engagement, and wellness, both the physical and the emotional wellness. And the needs and realities for this generation of students, both undergraduate and graduate, X, Y, and Z, are different than past generations, the boomers and the millennials. However, our talented faculty and staff are working together to address those differences, and your being here today speaks to your commitment to work through this as well. But we must use effective technology, pedagogy, and structure surrounding student support to ensure the student's success. But we must also continue to focus on diversity, inclusivity, and belonging. Those are very, very important factors. And inclusivity encompasses all backgrounds, perspectives, identities, etc. And these differences among us make us stronger, make us a better university and a better campus. And I'm sure that's something you'll talk about through this forum. How do we leverage those different experiences and strengths across our campus to build upon the momentum we have here at the University of Kentucky? Going forward, we're going to need to continue to have discussions like these. Who knows, we start over with Generation A. I don't know when that will happen, but probably sometime soon. And focus on how we can work together to understand and respond to the changing demographics in higher education and the broader world. After all, your engagement is crucial to the path forward. With that said, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, who will speak in more detail about this engagement. Our speaker today, Ryan Jenkins, is an internationally published author and columnist at Inc.com. He spent over 7 years as a speaker and trainer, helping organizations gain clarity around the emerging generations so that they can effectively lead, engage, and sell in today's multi-generational marketplace. And yes, you even have to sell differently to Generation Z than you do Generations X and Y. His top-ranked insights have been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and Success magazines. His fresh and forward-thinking approach to generations have made him one of the most highly sought-after generational and future of work speakers today. He's also a partner at 21mil.com, a digital training platform dedicated to helping millennials perform better at work. When he's not speaking and writing, you can find him sampling craft beers from around the U.S. or religiously cheering on the Denver Broncos. As I learned, he's from Denver, with his wife, 2 children, and a yellow Labrador from their home in Atlanta, Georgia. Please join me in welcoming speaker, author, and his words, below average golfer, Ryan Jenkins.
Okay, good morning. I want to kick things off with I want you to imagine your first experience using Uber. Now, if you've never used Uber or Lyft or any other ride-sharing service, I want you to imagine yourself in the scenario. So you heard a lot about Uber. You think, you know what, I'm going to the airport. I'm gonna use the app for the first time. So you pull out your phone, you download Uber, you put in your account information, you put in your photograph and your credit card information, and then you put in the destination and you summon your first vehicle. And then almost magically, you're assigned a vehicle. You can see the make and model, you can see the photo of the driver, and then in real time, you can see when the vehicle is going to arrive to pick you up. So it says it's going to be here in 5 minutes, so you toggle over, maybe look at some email, check Facebook, check sports scores, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden, you get a notification saying the car is out front. So you step outside, and sure enough, there's the same make and model. You enter the vehicle, and you begin going towards your destination. And that's when things start to get a little interesting, right? Perhaps even a little weird. Because this is your first time using Uber. And so when you arrive to your destination, in the back of your head, you're having this conversation of, what happens next? How do I complete this ride? Do I need to swipe a credit card? Well, there's no credit card machine inside an Uber, right? You're thinking, okay, well, maybe do I need to reopen the app and execute something? Well, that doesn't need to happen. And then if you're like me and you're a millennial, you're really panicking, thinking, oh my goodness, do I have to tip this person? Because as millennials, we left our cash in the 90s. So this Uber driver is definitely not getting his money, right? So we're thinking, oh my gosh, what's happened? This is your first Uber experience. And hopefully, your first Uber experience, you had an experienced driver that essentially looked back at you and very politely said, get out. And you're like, okay, so you exit the vehicle, you close the door, and the car drives off, and that's when the feeling hits you. Remember this? That feeling of, that was effortless. That was a seamless experience. And whether you know it or not, no matter your generation, that effortless and seamless experience is going to ripple into every other aspect of your work and your personal lives. But what's interesting is for the emerging generations, that ripple effect is happening exponentially faster and sooner in the emerging generations. And thus, it's created a new breed of student. It's created a new breed of worker. It's going to create a new breed of leaders. And so today, we are going to unpack why they're so different, why there's so much frustration and friction across generations. And the goal today is to alleviate some of that friction. So here's where we're going today. Actually, before we go there, let me tell you about today's big idea, and that is the next generation provides data points into what's next. What's next for your teaching? What's next for your recruiting process? What's next for your leadership? What's next for fill in the blank? Now more than ever, if we have a firm understanding of the emerging generations, we can get out ahead of the curve and we can pivot our communications. We can pivot our leadership. We can pivot our fill in the blank. So there's a lot of high value understanding who are the emerging generations. So the next generation provides data points into what's next. That's today's big idea. So here's where we're going to today. We're going to talk about generations. Who are they? How did we come up with generations, and why are they important? And then from there, we're going to talk about 5 strategies to engage generations. And lastly, we're going to have time for Q&A. So if you have your questions, jot it down, put it in your phone, and we'll have time at the end to address them. In every audience, and really any classroom on this campus, there's 2 questions rolling around in the minds of audiences. And those 2 questions are, so what and what now? So what and what now? So that's where we're going to today. I'm going to talk about so what, why is it important, generations, and then lastly we'll give you some actionable strategies to walk away with, as in the what now. What can you do after all this information? And there are some binoculars underneath your seats, so you can see some of this finer print. No, for those that can't see this, my email is up here, rj@ryan-jenkins.com. If you have a question 6 months from now, 6 hours from now, or 6 years from now, email me. I want to add as much value as I can outside of this limited time that I have with you today. Or if you have some questions, comments, concerns, email me. And yes, I am a millennial, but I will respond to email, I promise. And then the second link here is, jot this one down, it's ryan-jenkins.com/UK. ryan-jenkins.com/UK. At that link, you'll see all of today's slides. Everything that you're about to see is at that link. And if you're in the back and you really want to study these slides, you can download it right now. You can just go to that link, and the first link, click it. You can bring the slides right up. But if not, no problems. No one's going to get left behind. I'm going to address everything on the screen, and there's maybe only 2 or 3 where you might have to squint a little bit. So, and also at that link, I just put as much value as I could. We put the kitchen sink as it relates to leading, communicating, understanding generations, and so that'll be available to everyone in this room as long as the internet is turned on. Again, for us millennials, is really, really important. All right, so we're also gonna be doing some live polling today, so if you have a laptop, tablet, or mobile device, pull it out. I want you to go to whatever browser you prefer. So that could be Safari, Internet Explorer, Chrome, whatever it might be, Firefox. And so go to that, and then I want you to go to this link. Just simply go to this URL, pollev.com/live poll. pollev.com/live poll. Now, it's really important when you're typing in this URL that you don't fat finger or it doesn't autocorrect to love poll. That will be a completely different polling experience. We want to make sure you're here at live poll. So once you're there, you'll see kind of a dark blue welcome screen. And here's what you're going to do today. It's really easy. You're going to see the question, and then you simply just tap whatever answer you believe to be correct. And you'll see the results show up live on this screen. So very easy. You all with me? All right. Here we go. Here's our first poll. Probably some of you have already chimed in. Give it a minute here to load. And you won't have to hit the back button. You won't have to hit refresh. You won't have to do any of those things. It'll just show up magically, and of course, let me double check that I have an internet connection. It was working just when we did it right before this. There's always gremlins hanging out. Is it showing up on your mobile devices? No? Yes, some of you are getting it. Who sees the question? Just a few of you? Oh, a lot of you. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm connected here. Okay, I've lost my internet connection, but let me pull it up on my phone. That way, I can still see the results. We might even have to do this the old-fashioned way, which would be raise your hand. You remember those days? Oh, okay. Well, we might get a cooking here in a little bit. Do folks have an internet connection? Have you been able to connect to Wi-Fi? Oh, turn it off? Well, I need a Wi-Fi connection on the laptop. Okay, that's okay. We'll be able to step through it. So normally, as Tim said in the beginning, there's probably 3, maybe 4 generations represented in the room today. And here's a snapshot of all of the generations. These are US numbers. The middle column is the age. And on the right side of that screen is how large these generations were at their peak. So you notice there's 2 asterisks in the bottom right corner. And that's how large these generations, again, were at their peak. They're not that large anymore, just due to folks passing away. But it gives you a good sense of how the generations stacked up. And it's really important to, before we move forward through today's session and the rest of the 3 days, as you're going to be talking about generations, it's really important to note generations are clues, they're not absolutes. Generations are clues, they're not absolutes. And so in my opinion, they're big clues on how you lead, communicate, teach, sell, fill in the blank. So the better understanding we have of the generations, the better we can alleviate some of the friction that arises between the generations. So why might there be generational tensions? Why do you and I experience these generational tensions? Why are they perhaps, is there more friction than there was in the past? Well, let me give you a little idea of why that's happening. So the average life expectancy of humans in 1902, what do you think it is? Shout out your best guess. I'm hearing 60s, 70s. That's very ambitious. It's all lower than all of those. 49, we're getting warmer. 48, we're getting warmer. 47, I don't think I heard anybody say it, but I'm sure some of you said it. 47, doesn't that just blow your mind? 47 was the average life expectancy. That's the average between both sexes in the United States. Flash forward to today. Today it is 79 years old. Again, average between both sexes. So that's a 32-year increase since 1902. Pretty extraordinary. Because of advances in technology, because of advances in medicine, we're living longer. Now, research also tells us that the first person to celebrate their 150th birthday has already been born. So imagine, if you can, what it would look like and or feel like to have a midlife crisis at the age of 75 years old. The people in 1902 are going, 75, you gotta be with it. They think we're spoiled, right? So the reason I give you these numbers is, again, because as medicine advances, as technology advances, we're living longer, thus we're working longer. So there's 4 generations that you're interacting with that are navigating your campus today. And as Tim alluded to, now there's Generation Z. And pretty soon we're going to see Generation Alpha, which is the kind of the tentative name for this generation. And now there could be 5, 6, God forbid, 7 different generations that we're interacting with on a daily basis. And it's going to be right around the corner. So the tension that you and I are experiencing, leading, working, teaching, communicating across generations will only intensify moving forward. So again, it's really important that we find our footing in today's day and age, and why the generations matter and who they are. So to alleviate some of that friction, we're going to talk about those actionable strategies. So no one panic. My name's Ryan, I'm your friend. We're gonna figure all this generational stuff out together today. What do you say? Okay. So again, why are generations important? 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from a different generation. That means half the people that you work alongside, there is 1 out of 2 people, right? 50% of them, of someone from a different generation, there's gonna be a high potential for friction when working across generations. So this leads to communication miscues, this leads to leadership miscues, this leads to decrease in productivity, and it leads to a lot of other things that we're not even conscious of, right? And so that's why it's also important that we continue to prioritize overcoming of unconscious bias. And I know the extraordinary amount of tremendous work that University of Kentucky is doing in this space, so this is why it's so important that we continue to focus on overcoming the unconscious bias, because Now more than ever, we're bumping into folks, and there's high potential for friction, especially across generations. And generations trump gender, race, ethnicity, background, experience, any other diversity metric you can think of. Generations is the highest on the list for potential friction across employees. So again, this is why this is a hyper-relevant conversation today. So let's talk a little bit about generational diversity. This is a slide where you might have to bust out those binoculars. Organizations rated highly for diversity and inclusiveness report 70% more likely to succeed in new markets. They're 57% better team collaboration. There's 45% more likelihood of improving market share, and there's 19% greater retention. Those numbers speak for themselves. So generational diversity ultimately creates cognitive diversity. The more perspectives you can bring to a table, the better decision making that can occur. And so achieving cognitive diversity through a multi-generational team causes some of these things. It fuels innovation, it enhances engagement, it boosts employee and student satisfaction because every person can be represented as you're building new curriculum or thinking about new recruiting strategies or whatever it might be. We have to take into consideration each generation, and ultimately it drives success. The goal of generational diversity is to execute with the confidence of a baby boomer, with the experience of a Gen Xer, and with the velocity of a millennial. That's the goal, that's the hidden gem of generational diversity. So bottom line here, like-minded teams maintain, but it's the diverse teams that innovate. And as we're gonna see just in a few short slides, how important innovation is now more than ever before. There's gonna be some mind-melting happening here shortly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about generations. Why are they important? How did we come up with generations? First point here, generations are formed by significant events or trends during the multiple years of an age cohort. It used to be that we studied generation from a perspective of familial generations, where it was just one step, one line of descent behind an ancestor. That's kind of how we thought and measured generations. Well, now, as many of you know, interacting with students or perhaps your own children, innovations, technology, significant events, all these other things are imprinting this generation at a very moldable and young age. So the conversation of generations is really expanding, and it's becoming more and more relevant. This is really interesting. I don't know. I'm curious to know how many of you knew this, but baby boomers are the only officially labeled generation by the Census Bureau. So it's the only time, baby boomers are really the only officially labeled generation. And why they were officially labeled? Well, of course, when folks came back from the war, there was that spike in baby births, and there was a clear end point to the generations as well. Does anyone know why there was such a clear end to the boom in births? Shout it out if you think you know. The introduction of birth control. So there was a distinct boom in births. And so the Census Bureau thought, boy, this is so clear, we should label this time period in history. And they ultimately came up with a baby boom. How about that? Seemed pretty fitting. So it's the first and likely the last time that a generation will be labeled by a government entity. All of the generations before baby boomers have just been named retroactively, and all of the generations moving forward have really ultimately been named by either advertising agencies or prominent authors, or if you take Generation Y, which eventually became Millennials, their whole generation got around the term Millennials. They thought, hey, that sounds like a better name. It's more unique than compared to Generation X, so we like Millennials, so let's go with that. And so that's how Millennials became kind of the term over Generation Y. So it's not an exact science, but nor are people, right? We're all so different, so I think that's why there's some margin there as it relates to naming and labeling the generations. Age is a common predictor of differences in attitudes and behaviors. I think we can all agree on that. A 20-year-old's a lot different than a 40, 50, 60-year-old. They have different values, expectations, behaviors. And lastly, generational spans, typically 15 to 20 years, are shrinking due to heightened exposure. Now more than ever, Generation Z, they can't remember a world where a smart device has been outside of arm's reach, right? So they've had a 24/7 news cycle in the palm of their hands. So not only are they just connected with their peers, but they're connected with events and pivotal innovations and other significant ongoings that are around the world. And so it used to be, not too long ago, that if we lived in small villages or communities, and the only new information that we'd bump into is someone would come back and say, oh, there's a mountain range over there I just discovered. Or hey, there's a mountain lion, or there's a tiger behind that rock. Like, that's new information. Okay, let's adjust our behavior because of that. So our values and expectations didn't evolve that quickly way back when. But you think about today, again, this emerging generation has a 24/7 feed into news that's happening around the world. And so it's quickly shaping their values, it's shaping their behaviors, it's shaping their expectations. And so we believe that generations are typically 15 to 20 year spans, but I think because of more and more of the world comes online, generational spans will start to shrink. They're becoming more and more different and diverse moving forward. So here's a snapshot of the 2017 workplace. Millennials make up over 1 out of 3 employees in the workplace. And as of last year, in 2016, that was the first time that millennials outnumbered Generation X as the majority of the labor force. And so that was really significant, and that was kind of a pivotal event. And now you just notice Generation Z is notified here in gray. They've just now started entering the workplace, right? They're starting internships as young as high school. A lot of your freshmen, right, are considering starting internships. It seems like they're starting earlier and earlier. And so they are showing up into the workplace now. And they're showing up at a rapid rate. In fact, by 2025, it's estimated that 75% of the global workforce will be millennials and Generation Z. So let's camp out on this for a minute. I want you to wrap your head around this. Think about the way in which you work. Compare it with today versus 5 years ago. With the way in which you work, you teach, whatever it is that you're engaged with here on campus. Compare it with just 5 years ago. I bet the way you communicate, how you consume information, how the type of work you do has probably changed a lot just in those 5 years, right? Well, fast forward to 2025, which will be here before we know it, and how will work evolve? How will what we're doing evolve? Especially as 75% are of the emerging generation who are digital natives, who really think differently. I bet a lot of change is going to happen, right? My gut says that. I bet your gut is telling you the same thing. So we have to be ready for it. And how do we get ready for it? Through awareness, talking about generations, understanding some of their nuances, their behaviors, expectations, etc. That's how we get ready for it. So again, don't panic. Don't panic. My name's Ryan. I'm your friend. And we got 3 days to settle in with generations, so we'll be ready after that, all right? So let's talk about the millennials were really a global generation, but now you think about Generation Z, they're the first truly global generation. In fact, 58% of adults worldwide, ages 35 and above, agree that kids today have more in common with their global peers than they do with adults in their own country. So stated in another way, an 18-year-old here in Lexington might have more in common with an 18-year-old in India than they do with someone who's 65 and lives down the street from them. That is a seismic shift. That's never been the case. But again, now because more and more of the world comes online, geographies are shrinking. And so Generation Z, which we won't talk a lot about Generation Z. I've got a session later today where we'll go really in depth with this Generation Z. But think about it. They were able to jump on an Xbox, put in an earpiece, and game in real time with someone halfway around the world. That's no big deal for them. That's an expectation. That's normal. And so as they come onto your campus and as they begin spilling into the workplace, they're going to be, they have different ideas of what virtual collaboration looks like. Or they're going to be able to expect global collaboration and diverse teams. So the reason I put this slide in here is if your interactions with millennials or Generation Z extends across cultures or across borders or territories, just know that a lot of what we're going to talk about today, while it's US focused, a lot of the tendencies, behaviors, and strategies we're going to be talking about can be applied across borders. Because for the first time ever, these two generations have more in common with their global peers than any other generation before them. Okay? So why is today different? You might be thinking that. You might be thinking, okay, Ryan, this is compelling. This is interesting. But are the emerging generations really that different? isn't this just the youth? Isn't this how it always been? Because you can probably think back to, or you've probably seen Socrates was once quoted the emerging generation, the young generation. He said that they were lazy and disrespectful and fill in the blank. So these labels and these, the finger pointing is not new. But here is what's new, and here's why today's really different, and again, why it's a relevant conversation. Millennials and Generation Z are a critical mass of change agents. So what is a critical mass? Well, you all know, but just a refresher course. Critical mass is when you have a balanced scale, and you finally have enough of something on that scale to tip that scale. That's critical mass. So because millennials are the largest generation on the planet, they've tipped a lot of scales. Wherever they show up, they tip the scales. But that doesn't make millennials unique. Because baby boomers, when you came into the workplace and marketplace, you tipped a lot of scales because of your sheer size. So what makes millennials and Generation Z really unique is two items. And these two items are arguably the greatest disruptors humanity's ever seen. These are the two items that many consider to be the greatest equalizer the world has ever seen. And those two items are technology and the internet. It's changed the game. It's changed how all of us live, work, and play, hasn't it? It's disrupted it. We can feel the ground moving beneath us, and a lot of it's because of these two items. So you have technology and the internet, and you put those on the shoulders of the largest generation on the planet and the most digitally native generation on the planet, and that's the recipe for massive disruption. That's the recipe for a lot of change. And so really this has created exponential times, and we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by exponential times. But I'm willing to bet probably 100% of the people in this room have probably read an article about millennials or seen another speaker about millennials or watched some kind of video about millennials or seen them mentioned in a commercial. And so why they're so highly scrutinized, one is because they're the largest generation on the planet, but the other reason is because all of us have this sense that things are changing. The ground is moving underneath our feet. We can sense it, but we're not quite sure where it's coming from or what exactly is changing or what will change. And so really we're looking to millennials, and they're the face of the change, right? They're the face of the coming change and the disruption, and so that's why I believe they're so highly scrutinized. And they really just give us data points. Remember, the next generation provides data points into what's next. So if we understand millennials, if we understand Generation Z, they're going to influence, they're going to give us insights into how we pivot and how we can thrive, how we can teach, lead, communicate, and run our departments and organizations like it's the 21st century. That's the goal here. The goal is never to change for the emerging generations. The goal is to change in light of the emerging generations. Okay, so what do I mean by exponential times? I'm going to do a quick exercise. I want you to just name an invention of the past. And we can go back as far as fire if you want to, okay? So I'm going to come down here, and I just want you to shout out an invention of the past. Let's hear some of them. I heard iPhone. What else? Car. What'd you say? Telephone. Microwave. Printing press. What was it? Google something? Movable type press. Record player. Wash machine. Electricity. Engine. TV. The wheel. Of course. Patent number 2, right? Right behind fire. Exactly. All right, give me a few more. I'm coming over here on this side. Airplane. What else was said? Coffee machine, of course. That should have been top of mind for all of us. All right, give me a few more. Cotton gin. X-rays. 2 more. Light bulb, automobile. 1 more. Bicycle, semiconductor. Okay, wow, that was really good. Did we get them all? I think we got them all, didn't we? We named them. So those of you that weren't playing or didn't mention anything, you could have said anything in this room, right? You could have said, table, chair, clothes, belt. Like at some point, all these things in this room were at some point an invention, which is pretty extraordinary how far we've come as a society and humanity. But here's what's interesting. 100% of the responses that I heard from this audience were physical inventions. I heard coffee maker, the cotton gin, car, TV, telephone, which, were all the wheel, were all inventions, but they were physical inventions. So here's what's interesting. Because all of those great inventions of the past were physical inventions, that limited their capacity in how quickly they could change our behaviors and how quickly they could disrupt industries or disrupt institutions or organizations because they were physical inventions, right? Take the car, for example. It took forever for that thing to be invented, and then it took decade upon decade upon decade for it to infiltrate our culture and ultimately change how we lived and worked. But if you contrast all of the physical inventions that you just mentioned with today, there's a lot of inventions now that are happening in the cloud, right? In the digital world, in cyberspace. And because those inventions are intangible, software as a service, apps, Netflix, Amazon, because these are all essentially intangible inventions, they have exponential power to change you and I's behavior, to our behavior. I'm not sure if that was proper grammar, so I'm really sweating talking to this group. They have exponential power to change all of our behaviors and disrupt everything, right? So let me give you one example that really hit home with this group. Netflix. Only 8% of U.S. college students do not have access to Netflix. Only 8% don't. Now, they're not all paying for it, right? We definitely know that. A lot of them are mooching, and they're passing around their username and password to everyone. But isn't that incredible? So think about this. Netflix only started streaming in 2007. So since 2007, they've got 98% of arguably the most coveted demographic the world is trying to get their message in front of, right? Less than 8%, or right around 8%. So let me give you a couple more examples of exponential times. And this slide, you're going to have to get out 2 pairs of binoculars, but I'm going to walk through everything, okay? So don't panic. So let me give you a couple more examples of how exponential times are changing and how they've really disrupted every industry you can really think about. So Uber is the first example. We're going to contrast it with Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company is valued approximately around $60 billion. Uber's worth approximately $70 billion. Ford was founded in 1903. Uber was founded in 2009. Why was Uber able to become the fastest growing startup of all time? It's because we all own one of these. And so this has been the channel in which Uber has infiltrated and grown over $10 billion more more valuable than Ford Motor Company that's been around since 1903. All right, let's do some more. Does anybody know what this icon is? Pokemon Go, that's right, Pokemon. You guys thought you were done hearing about Pokemon Go, didn't you? Thought, oh, we're finally over it. Campus is back to normal. There's not thousands of students running around trying to catch Pikachu, right? Those of you that don't remember Pokemon Go, it's about 2 years old, roughly. And Pokemon Go was an augmented reality app where people could walk around real time and try to capture these creatures. And it took over the world. And it was the fastest growing app of all time. You ready for some of these numbers? In their first month, Pokemon Go was downloaded by 130 million people. 130 million people downloaded it. And in the first 90 days, they netted $600 million in revenue. $600 million in the first 90 days. It was the fastest app of all time to hit 130 million and the fastest ever to hit 600 million in revenue. So because you and I are now connected, we live in a hyper-connected world, an app was able to hit the App Store and change all of our behaviors. It took over the world. Now, Pokemon Go fizzled a little bit. There's still a lot of strong activity with it. But here's what I want you, we all need to become students of what's happening around us. We all need to hack our own behavior, start hacking the behavior of our students and the people around us, how technology is changing our behaviors and changing our expectations. Because Pokemon Go, hate it or love it, it confirmed that this emerging generation is ready for more augmented reality experiences. And now, 1 out of 4 Generation Zers expect virtual reality experiences inside the organizations they go work for. So it's we need to be students of all these things happening because it influences us. It gives us data points into what's next. And oh, by the way, Snapchat, of course, Snapchat, which over 60% of the emerging generation is on and uses multiple times a day, on average, I think 11 times a day. Snapchat is just augmented reality, right? It's drip feeding augmented reality to this generation. So of course, that's why Pokemon Go was ready and took off, because this generation has just been consuming augmented reality experiences for as long as they can remember. All right, Airbnb. Airbnb is the it's the number one hotel service around the world. Marriott's number one. Marriott has 1 million rooms available around the world since 1927, pretty incredible. But Airbnb has double the amount of rooms, 2 million, and they were only founded in 2008. Again, you and I live in exponential times. Facebook, does anyone remember what happened on August 24th, 2015 with Facebook? When they changed it? They went public, good guesses. I feel like Facebook was, I got Facebook in college. We were one of the first to get it in college, and I feel like every other month Facebook changed, right? They're changing the interface constantly. But, I think I heard it over here. 1 billion users, even more specific than that? Who said that? One day? That's right. 1 billion people used Facebook in a single day. 1 out of 7 people on the planet used the exact same service on a single day. That could have never happened in any other time in history but the exponential times that you and I live in. Now, today, over 2 billion people use Facebook on a monthly basis. So 2 out of 7 people use it on a monthly basis. So you could probably remember, it might have been you yourself, or it might have been a friend of yours at one point told you, or perhaps you told yourself, I'll never be on Facebook. That thing's for the kids, right? I'm not gonna have you raise your hands, because I'm sure probably 70% of you probably are like, that was me. And now what? Now we're using it. 2 out of 7 people on the planet are using it. I bet a lot of you never thought you would send an emoji to somebody. In fact, raise your hand if you sent an emoji already this morning. Raise your hand. It's maybe 30, 40% of you. And we're sending them to our colleagues now too, aren't we? What's interesting now is, first time in history, we're seeing behaviors rippling up generations like never before. So be careful not to dismiss things that seem childish, because we might all be doing them or participating in the very near future. Instead, I think it's more important that we become practitioners. We begin poking with these things, trying to understand, how is this going to change how I teach? How is this going to influence how I work with my colleagues? Or how do I recruit this next generation onto our teams? All right, Dollar Shave Club, for the gentlemen in the room, you might know this product. It's the men's grooming product, and it's shipped directly to your front door. You don't have to go to a grocery store and try to pry open the plastic container to just look to see if that's the right product that you want for your your shaving needs. So Dollar Shave Club, and Gillette was the market share leader with 72% in 2012. And 2012 was when Dollar Shave Club was founded. And they became the market share leader with 51% in just 3 years, 2015. So they overtook Gillette in just 3 years, and they did it, by the way, with a $4,500 YouTube video. That's all it took. You and I live in exponential times. The smart device that you have in your hand, or it's in your pocket or purse, that device is 100,000 times smaller and several billion times more powerful than a computer was in the early 1970s. You and I we take this tool for granted now, right? I mean, we all just take it for granted. And if you gave this tool to a child in a developing country, they would have access. As soon as they put their hands on a mobile device, they would instantly have access to more information than the President of the United States did just 15 years ago. So you and I live in exponential times. And oh, by the way, a lot of the world isn't connected to the internet yet. And why the Facebooks and the Googles of the world are trying to connect the world is because research says that 1 out of 7 people that gain an internet connection can actually raise themselves out of poverty, because it's a really extremely powerful tool for education, entrepreneurship, you name it. And so they're trying to connect the world. So as more and more of the world comes online in the coming decades, they're anticipating that 5 billion new minds are going to come online. So that's 5 billion new ideas, that's 5 billion new students, that's 5 billion new potential competitors. I mean, If we think that the world's moving really fast now, just wait till when 5 billion people come online. Lots of things to look forward to, I think. All right, and then lastly, Casper. Some of you might know Casper. It's the innovative mattress company. They ship mattresses directly to your front door. They come in a big box. And they did, in 2014, that's when they launched, and they did $1 million in sales. And it was their first month in business. And then by 2016, they have over $200 million in revenue. So it's a company that's disrupted the space because we all have an internet. Most of the folks in the United States have connection to an internet-enabled device, and they can just order the product right to their home. So all of these, they're not. These aren't anomalies, right? I could keep going on and on and on and on. These are just the preview, and no individual, no industry, no institution is immune from the disruption power of the exponential times that you and I live in. So yes, millennials, yes, Generation Z are coming up and they're demanding a lot of change, but the bigger picture here for you and I, it's the exponential times that you and I live in that are forcing us to change. And if we decide to just sit on what always worked and what always once was, then we could get past at the speed of Dollar Shave Club, right? Or Uber, or Airbnb. So now more than ever, we have to be thinking innovatively. We have to invest in these opportunities to come and think and to expand what it might be that we were working on or whatever it might be. So I want to take this one step further and really hammer home how this is changing the emerging generations. So you remember the example we used at the top talking about your first Uber experience? Or you had that first Uber experience and you're thinking, wow, this is effortless, this is seamless, this is a great experience. So that effortless and seamless experience for all of us, whether you know it or not, that's becoming an expectation that's rippling into every other aspect of your life. But it's happening exponentially faster in the emerging generation, and it's happening sooner in the emerging generation. And why that's happening is because of this. For Generation Z, they can't remember a world prior to Uber. Uber's always existed in their mind. So to them, Uber is not an innovation. It's standard. It's normal. So another example is I have 2 kids under the age of 3 at home. They will not know a world where they can't touch a slab of glass and order pretty much any product that they can think of, right? Whether that be a mattress or a home, I'm going to come back to that in a second, and have it delivered to their front door within an hour via a drone. Because my children don't know that that world has never existed, that's their expectation. That's where their expectations start, and it's all normal to them. So because having a drone deliver whatever they want to their front door, that will fundamentally reshape how they expect goods and services to be delivered to them. That's going to fundamentally shape how quickly they expect information, communication, or whatever it might be. So these are the factors that are really imprinting the emerging generations. And it's true for all of us. No matter your generation, if you can't remember a time prior to the wheel, to us, then the wheel's not an innovation, right? It's an expectation. And that's where your expectations start. So that doesn't make you entitled. That makes you a new generation with a different perspective, living in a new reality. And so the faster we can kind of wrap our heads around that, I think the faster we can alleviate some of this friction and really propel our teams forward. Okay, so here's some of the questions that are going to be rolling around in the heads of millennials or Generation Z. They might be standing in line at a grocery store now, and they're going to be thinking, this is a terrible experience, right? Because Amazon Go offers me to just walk into one of their stores, grab anything in that store, and walk right out, right? Or they might be thinking, why do I need to stay, in these hour-long onboarding trainings that for my employer when I can go to YouTube and get the exact same information on my mobile device, and I can consume it whenever I want, and I can speed it up and consume it in a fraction of the time? Or why do I need to stand in line to get my hotel key when I just came from a Marriott that offers me to download my key to my mobile device and go straight to my room and then do all of the communications with the front desk via the app? Or they might be thinking, why should I stay at my employer when I can go to glassdoor.com and see all of the other organizations that are better fit for me, that might offer better salaries, that are rated better, and I can just go get a job with them. The exponential times that you and I live in are keeping us all accountable as leaders, as the people that are participating in the modern workforce. It's all keeping us accountable to deliver more effortless and seamless experiences for our students and for the folks that work alongside of us in the workplace. So we have to now, more than ever before, we have to be focused on delivering an effortless and seamless experience, because if we don't, then the next generation is a finger swipe away from finding someone who can deliver it. So, I know we spent a lot of time on this exponential times, but that's the bigger picture. And the Millennials and Generation Z, the emerging generation, give us data points into how we can figure this out and successfully thrive in the 21st century. So I think it's really important. All right, so let's move into the 5 strategies. And we've got a poll, and we'll see if it's probably not going to work. Oh, here we go. I'm back online, I guess. This is fantastic. All right, so you don't have to hit refresh. You don't have to hit the back button. Just whatever you believe to be the correct answer, hit that. And again, if you don't remember what the URL is, the website is poll, pollev.com/live poll. And it's up here on the screen, but it's really tiny, so probably only people in the front can see it. So the question is, 43% of the emerging generation prefer a blank approach to learning and find it easiest to learn from blank. Looks like the room is pretty confident in what that might be. Well, y'all nailed it. Digital and the internet, that is the correct answer. I don't think that would surprise anybody, especially after everything we talked about. So that question cues us up to that learning is changing, and how the emerging generations prefer to learn is different. And so for each one of these categories, the 5 categories, we're going to look at a chart that looks just like this, and we're going to look at how the majority, the 4 millennials that are inside the workplace, and most of, we're just going to hang on millennials because we're going to save Generation Z for later today. We're going to look at how they approach the category. So each generation prefers or looks at learning differently. So let's look at what that is. For builders, their summary of learning is 1-to-1. Boomers, 1-to-many. Gen X, many-to-1. But millennials are looking for more individualized yet communal learning. Their view of it, builders view learning on the job, boomers classroom, Gen X e-learning, and millennials are looking for mobile, micro, and on-demand learning. Their attitude towards learning, builders want to refine niche expertise, boomers formal and top-down approach, Gen X view it as a way to get ahead, and millennials, they're viewing it as constant and continuous. Millennials and Generation Z, they know they're going to have the longest career of any generation before them, and so they know that they're going to constantly have to be learning all along their journey. They're going to have to be learning. All right, and then this will be interesting, probably going to ruffle a little feathers here, but I think it's important to talk about education. How does each generation view education? Builders saw it as a dream, boomers a birthright, Gen X a differentiator, and millennials are scratching their head going, was it a mistake? Because of all this student debt that I'm carrying around, right? And I think the latest research I've seen out there, that over 40% of millennials are employed at a job that doesn't require a college degree. So they're scratching their head going, was there something else I should have done, right? And so that's really influencing the emerging generation, and so I'll leave some of that talk for when we talk about Generation Z and how their thought process is around education. But holistically, you see that learning's changing, right? So let me give you some things to think about as it relates to learning. First of all, there's a shift in authority. Millennials and Generation Z are the first generations that have come of age and don't look to parents or teachers as the authority, right? Think about this. They don't look to parents or teachers as the authority, but rather, who or what do they consider to be the authority? What do you think? Their peers, good guess. Celebrities, I love that. There's probably a lot of truth there. Probably one step further, I'd say YouTube influencers, probably, right? Would be pretty accurate. Any other guesses? Themselves? Yeah. Oh, there it was. Google, but I guess bigger picture, the internet. They consider the internet to be the authority. Many of you have probably seen this, right? You probably have you've seen students fact-checking you while they're in a meeting with you or in the classroom, right? Right there on their mobile device. They don't care. They have no, all right? Or if you parent this emerging generation, you've probably been fact-checked on numerous occasions in real time. So that's a real seismic shift because we have the world's information has been curated into a blank search box. So it's changed how this generation problem solves. It's changed how they view authority. So the bottom line here is we've moved from a, looking at parents or teachers as the authority, but rather it's in the palm of their hand. That's the now authority. So coaching is the number one leadership and learning style that resonates with the emerging generations. It's coaching. If I'm working with large organizations on how they can better lead this emerging generation, it's all about coaching. Because think about it, this emerging generation, they grew up surrounded by coaches, right? Coaches just handing them a trophy for just showing up, right? So they're pretty open to this idea of coaching. But the bigger picture here is we have to trade this idea of sage on a stage, I know everything, versus a guide on the side. Because they don't view managers, teachers, parents as the authority. They're not coming to those individuals looking for the authority, looking for the answer, but they're wanting to do a lot of self-directed learning and then have those influences be on the side guiding them. So bottom line here, here's our first strategy, is to be a guide on the side. Trade sage on the stage for guide on the side. So coach the next generation through their learning, through their failures, through their successes. And the best way to be a coach is ask the right questions. Ask the right questions and have them look internally to mine the right answer. And that's ultimately what's going to help them become just better individuals, better researchers, whatever it might be. So that's our first strategy. Let's move to category number 2. Looks like some of you guys have already chimed in here. Millennials want blank percent more often than other employees. Someone must have hit the jackpot. They got all the right answers. That's what happens. If you hit all the right answers, your phone will go off, which is really exciting. Millennials want blank 50% more often than other employees. So it looks like recognition is high on the list, followed by feedback and career advancement and coaching are kind of in the similar. Well, career advancement now is leading up. Okay, feedback is inching. The correct answer is feedback. Feedback is the correct answer. Although there's probably a case to be said for any of these responses. So we're going to talk about leadership now, because who gives feedback normally, right? It's a leader, it's a manager, it's a career coach, a career services, perhaps coaching, mentoring someone. It comes from a leadership figure. So let's look at how each generation views leadership. Builders want to endure it. Boomers respect it. Gen X ignore it. Millennials want to choose it. Think about this. The emerging generations, millennials, they grew up with a connection to the internet, right? So they were able to customize pretty much anything they could ever think of via the internet. They pull that expectation into the universities they attend. They pull that expectation into the workplaces they go work for. They're looking for more customization. They want to customize their degree. They want to customize their job title. They want to customize their workspace. And Generation Z is going to have that similar expectation as well. I want to customize. So there's some organizations that are actually allowing new hires that are coming into their organization right at a college and having them choose the leaders in which they want to go work for, which is super interesting. Their view of leadership: builders want to honor it, boomers respect, Gen X autonomy, millennials equals. When a majority of millennials, their top response when asked who their best friends were, what do you think millennials' top responses were to that question? Their best friend. Any guesses? I think I heard it back there. It's not Siri, it's not their phone, it's not, someone once told me a mirror. Is the mirror their best friend? I was like, that's interesting. Any thoughts? I thought I heard in the back. Their best friends are their parents. Their parents. And that's the first time in research that we've seen that parents and friends are showing up together. And so this for baby boomers that raised this generation, they gave them a seat at the table, they valued their opinion, and so they saw their parents as friends, as someone they wanted to be equal with. And they're pulling that expectation into the workplace. You're probably seeing this play out inside your classrooms as well, whereas they're looking at someone that's in a decision-making role or a leadership position, and they're seeing them as an equal, someone they want to get along with, someone they want to, they feel like they can contribute right away from day one. So it's interesting how that's played out. And then lastly, their leadership attitude. No news is good news. Boomers want feedback once per year. Gen X routine check-ins. And millennials want constant feedback. So this is perhaps one of the most glaring points as it relates to working across generations, is this idea of feedback. How do we give the appropriate level of feedback as different generations view feedback very differently? So to tee up our next strategy, I want you to take a look at this clip.
By the second.
It's crazy, huh?
I'll just replay it.
Charlie, the demand on this network, it is increasing by the second.
It's crazy, huh?
And people are relying on it more than ever. We cover more than 99% of all Americans.
I can't imagine living without it. It's a place where people can come share knowledge and ideas. It's beautiful.
That's deep, Charlie.
My selfie just hit 100 likes. 100!
AT&T is building you a better network.
Millennials and the emerging generation have grown up in a hyper-rich feedback environments. They were able to post things online and get feedback in the forms of likes, shares, retweets, comments. So they've had an appetite for feedback for as long as they can remember, and they're pulling that expectation into the classroom and into the workplace. And so they're looking for more constant and real-time feedback. So what's the strategy to get around this and alleviate this friction is to consider self-reviews, right? And so this is going to be probably a better fit for those that are working alongside this generation, but those that might be teaching this generation, you have to crank the gears a little bit harder to figure out how this might work for you. But consider self-reviews. So if just punt to the emerging generation and have them review their own performance. And so if you do that, three things are going to happen. Number one, millennials and Generation Z are more critical. Research shows that they're going to be more critical of their own work than if a manager actually was reviewing their own performance. Number two, ownership is taken. Well, if you're reviewing your own performance, then you're developing a self-evaluation muscle that you can then flex in real time when you find yourself in a similar situation. And then lastly, managers turn into coaches. So no longer are you considered a nitpicking manager, right? But they bring in their review and you can actually affirm where they've identified some weaknesses and you can encourage where they have identified some strengths. So it makes the review process that much more enjoyable, which most of us don't really care for those type of environments anyways. And the hidden benefit here, of course, is it saves time as well. So let me give you a couple examples of how this is playing out in the real world. And the examples I'm going to give you are all from industry, but that's intentional. I try to get all examples that are outside of what's normal for my audience, because if I told you what your competitors were doing, and if you decided to go do that, then you'd just be a copycat. And in today's exponential times, we have to innovate faster than our competitors can copy. So here's a couple examples. Hodges Ward Elliott is a real estate firm, and they have millennials actually review their own performance before meeting with managers. General Electric managers give constant feedback through an app called Performance Development at GE. This happened last year. Last year, General Electric had the same annual review process for 30 years, and they ended it last year, and in its place, they created an app. And if you ask the head of HR for GE why they did that, they'd say they have the emerging generations in mind because they're looking for more constant and real-time feedback, and so we're trying to move into the 21st century and enable that through an app. And all of the managers now are actually encouraged to be more coaches than managers and to have more frequent touch points. AT&T is doing something similar to GE. AT&T teams are connected via the Loop app, where employees create goals, receive feedback, and adjust performance. So that more and more, there's more tools out there that are enabling this feedback to happen between colleagues, between managers and direct reports, et cetera. So these are just three examples how industry and organizations are rethinking how they deliver feedback and how they're kind of essentially enabling more self-review. All right, as we move into our next category, here's the question I want you to ask yourself. There's no right or wrong answer on this one, I promise. I just want you to know if there was one way you could communicate at work, what would it be? If there was only one way in which you could communicate, what would be your favorite or which would be your preferred? Okay, now some folks have chimed in with texting. The folks that just chimed in with texting, you were probably having a texting conversation, and that's why you're a little late to the polling party, right? I think that's probably what happened there. Some of you are social collaboration. That's interesting. Great. So looks like primarily it's face-to-face and email with instant messaging and text tied for third. So that's pretty normal, is what we see. But here was the goal of this slide. This slide, the goal here was to elevate your blood pressure just a little bit, right? Because you're thinking, okay, look at all these different channels in which I need to think about communicating with somebody. And just in this room alone, there's 6 different preferences. So your colleagues have 6 different preferences on how they want to communicate. And oh, by the way, you now overlay the complexity of each generation has their own perspective and preference for communication. It's gotten really complicated. So there's one generation that wants to talk to you face to face. Then there's another generation that'll send you an email. And there's another generation that has no problem whatsoever texting you while they're standing right next to you. We won't mention any names, Millennials and Generation Z, right? So it's very complex, and we've created this environment for ourselves, so we kind of have to lie in the bed that we made, right? So if you find yourself, well, before I go there, let's look at how each generation views communication. Summary, builders view communication, they want it to be formal, respectful. Boomers, formal, direct. Gen X, informal, flexible. And millennials want it informal, and they want it to be authentic communication. Their view of it, builders, phone and email. Boomers, email and text. Gen X, email, text, Facebook. Millennials, text, Instagram, GroupMe, Snapchat, Slack. Basically anything that has nothing to do with face-to-face communication, right? My generation, we're just going to be like, no thank you. No thanks. And lastly, their attitude towards communication. Builders need background info and details. Boomers want to keep it professional. Gen X need options and zero meetings. And millennials want brevity, real-time, quick responses. So communication changes across generations. So let me give you just one example of how this plays out across generations, right, in the real world. So I'm going to give you one example. Now, this is a smart bunch. I know none of you have ever had this thought, nor have you ever done this, but I assure you this has happened, okay? So someone out there once thought it was a productive idea to call a millennial. They thought, I'm going to actually get this person on the other line and we're going to have a productive conversation and I'm going to get the answers I need, right? Okay? I know none of you have done this, but let's say you did. Let's say you were interested to see if hell would freeze over and you thought, I'm going to call a millennial. Here's what would happen, right? You'd take out your phone, you open up your phone app, and you dial their number. And you call them. It rings once, and then it goes right to voicemail, right? Because it only rings once, because they're on the other line, say, decline. Why is someone calling me? What was that, right? And so it goes right to voicemail, and 2 things are going to happen at that point. One, either the voicemail box is full, or it's not set up. Exactly, yeah. So you just get that automated, like, this person's too lazy to set up their voicemail, so leave it. And so you're thinking, okay, that's kind of interesting, not my preference, but whatever. So you begin to leave your voicemail. You say, hey, Mary, it's Ryan. It's 12 o'clock on XYZ date. I don't know why we find this urge to say the date and time when we have visual voicemail now, right? Like we know when people call. Anyway, hey, just checking in on XYZ. Just interested to know if I need to follow up with whoever. And and you go, you just got this text from the person you were calling, right? So you're thinking, what's up? Like I just called, you're thinking in your head, you're thinking, I just called you and you declined it. So you're clearly not in the shower or you're not on a plane. Like you can answer the phone and they just say, what's up? So you think, now you're a little agitated. So you finish the voicemail, and you say, okay, anyway, yeah, I'm checking up on XYZ, and just call me back, 404-590. Again, why do we leave our phone numbers anymore? We have visual voicemail. Anyway, so you leave your voicemail, you hang up, and then you think, okay, I'm going to close the loop. There was some important information in that voicemail, really important information, in that 1 minute and 30 second voicemail. So you're going to text them just to close the loop. I'm going to let them know, hey, just sent you a voicemail. And then you're thinking, great, the loop's closed. I can go on the rest of my day, and then instantly you hear this back. They're just asking you, okay, what's up? And now you're pissed, right? Now you're thinking, the assumption, I was alluding to you checking your voicemail with that text message, and now you're not even going to check it. And we can't blame them, but we know that if you leave a voicemail with a millennial, it will die a lonely, lonely death in the sea of unheard voicemails that they have on their phone. We've been warned now, right? Now, the reason you're chuckling at this example is because you've been on one side or the other of this example, right? And it's just one example of how generations are colliding as it relates to communication. So if you find yourself in this scenario, here's something to think about. I want you to defer your communications. Defer your communications. Use generations as a clue and adjust your communication to how you think that person would prefer to communicate. So if you're a baby boomer or Gen Xer trying to connect with a millennial or Generation Zer, you're definitely not going to leave them a voicemail, right? Because we know how that plays out. So you might want to send them a text or instant message or something else. Vice versa is true. If emerging generations are trying to communicate up, they may want to not send a text or DM on Twitter or set up a group me. They're probably going to want to pick up the phone, schedule a face-to-face or whatever it might be. So now more than ever, the bottom line here is adjusting your communications is the new norm. We all have to become double threats because this is the bed that we've made for ourselves, and so we have to be better online communicators and offline communicators. And that goes for any communications you're sending out. That's for sending emails, that's sending, any recruiting material you're putting out there, whatever it might be, you have to think of the target market inside your head, and you have to put it in a format that they can easily consume. Because now more than ever, there's more clamoring for our attention than ever before, and so to cut through the noise, we've got to be really specific, and we've got to find the right channel in which to communicate with the other generations. So let me give you a couple examples of how this strategy is playing out in the real world. Charity Water, which is a nonprofit that delivers clean water to the parts of the world that need it, they have replaced all internal email with Slack. And Slack is a cloud-based team collaboration tool. So Slack, the CEO of Slack, his primary goal is to eradicate email. Sometimes I get an amen when I say that line. Some folks just feel compelled to jump out of their seat. So Slack was rated, Inc. magazine rated Slack the most innovative company of the year in 2016. They have millions of users now, and in a lot of organizations, Charity Water's just one, where it's replacing email. And if you think about it, the emerging generations coming into the workplace, they're looking for more dynamic communication tools, and Slack is a product that is delivering on that desire. Applebee's used a mobile game to have employees collaborate and compete on important work metrics. So for Applebee's, they launched a product called B Block, and it was mostly for their frontline Millennial and Generation Z employees. And they could use this game, and they could get points that could then be redeemed for gift cards or days off, etc. And they got points for selling certain items off the featured menu for that month. Or they could get points for taking courses on restaurant etiquette or maybe a leadership course. And they could also get points for showing up on time. And so they got all these points, and they could deliver that into, or translate that into, again, time off or different perks. And for Applebee's, when they announced this product and for their workforce, it resulted in a 20% reduction in employee turnover. So for them and for folks in the restaurant space, that is a huge number. So it's one example of how one organization is thinking, hey, this generation is a gaming generation, and we need to deliver anything that they interact with in a very mobile-friendly, mobile-first way. And then lastly, John Deere, a manager, texts his millennial employees every afternoon before driving home to provide correction or direction. So they just have that in the routine now. Every time before I start the car, before I head home, I'm going to text all of my millennial employees and give them correction or direction. So I'm going to use a communication channel that is native to them and I'm going to give them correction or direction. Not fluffy praise, right? Correction or directions. And when the gentleman shared this story with me, he said, Ryan, I'm floored by how when I show up, get home later that night, I see some of the folks online working against that correction or direction, or I see them show up the next day attacking what I sent them via that text. So again, just some examples to get the gears turning on how do we need to adjust our communications to really make sure that it's hitting the right audience. We're moving now to category number 4, I believe. So what do you think the answer to this question is? What percent of millennials were strongly influenced by how innovative a company was when deciding if they wanted to work there? Looks like 78%, half the room is set on that. 78% is the correct answer. And some of you aren't quite sure if this is like live, so you're probably chiming in on 100%, thinking, is this really live? I'm just going to test. This is also typically the part in this presentation where you guys are a little bit more familiar with the polling service, and you know there's a clear response button at the very bottom. So when I told you the answer already, you can go down there and hit your clear response, and then you can chime in. So I typically see when I say that and then I go on and talking about it, that people will just start chiming in with the right answer. And this seems like a very honest bunch, though, because none of you are doing that. I guess I need to know my audience, right? Because you all about integrity, right? And some of you are still chiming in with the wrong answer, wondering if this is even... You have fallen asleep on your phone or on your tablet. Well, welcome back. My name is Ryan. I'm your friend. Hope you learned something today. All right, 78%. So I don't think, again, that would surprise anybody, but really it's leading us to this idea of technology. Each generation views technology very differently. Let's look at what they are. Builders, no tech; boomers, some tech; Gen X, high tech; millennials, all tech. Right? If they come into a meeting, you ask them to silence their phone, they're going to feel like you just severed an arm, and they're going to be like, what? What am I supposed to do? This is a part of me. Builders view technology as a hindrance. Boomers, enhancer; Gen X, balancer; millennials, amplifier, aka social media, right? And lastly, their attitude. Builders hope to outlive it. They're thinking, I swear, if I have to get a Snapchat account just to see my grandson, I'm going to go bonkers, right? I just want this Snapchat thing to blow over. Why don't someone just call me, right? Boomers want to master it, Gen X want to enjoy it, and millennials need to employ it. So very different preferences as it relates to technology. So to set up our next strategy, I want you to take a look at this clip.
Kind of like grandkids equals free tech support.
Oh, cheers. Oh, look at you. So great to see you. None of this works. Come on in.
That's it. Look at this. She's getting denied a hug from grandma with technology. So we're chuckling at this. Why? Because we've been on either side of this at some point, right? But here's what's really, really, really fascinating. It's really important that we get a grip on. This is the first time in human history, that emerging generations are coming into classrooms and coming into on your campuses and coming into the workforce that have skills and knowledge that previous generations don't have. That's the first time in human history that's ever happened. And that's why, again, there's so much friction surrounding this emerging generation, because they're coming in and they're ready to contribute in new ways that we've never thought possible. And so now that generational diversity is so important. Overcoming unconscious bias is so important because we don't know what we don't know. So we have to give margin to this emerging generation to find new ways of executing things or coming up with things. So that's why it's really important. That's one of the primary reasons, again, why these emerging generations are so highly scrutinized, is because they're of like no other generation before. They've been helping mom and dad, grandma and grandpa figure out what Facebook was, how to use a smartphone, troubleshooting a laptop. So it's very different. They were the household chief technology officers.
Kind of like
So let's talk a little bit about, here's the strategy 4 as it relates to technology, to implement reverse mentoring. I bet many of you are already thinking about this. Perhaps you're even implementing, you have structured programs around this. So reverse mentoring is finding someone that's more junior than you and having them mentor you. Tough pill to swallow, I understand. But hopefully, since we're all chuckling at that last clip, we understand that there is a shift. And if we want to stay ahead of the curve, then we should engage in reverse mentoring. So if you decide to engage in reverse mentoring, 3 things are going to happen. Number 1, the next generation is familiar with mentoring up, as we just saw in that clip. They're very familiar with mentoring up, so it's very natural for them to be in that scenario. Number 2, insights into the next generation. You're going to get insights into next generation students or employees. So if you're engaging with them on a routine basis, you're going to glean insights that you never thought were possible, or you never thought about that, or that's why they're using Snapchat, or that's why they're preferring this other social media outlet, or whatever it might be. And then lastly, it creates opportunities for next generation to develop communication skills. This is perhaps the most important aspect of reverse mentoring. If you decide to engage in reverse mentoring, by default, you are modeling what it looks like to have a firm handshake, the power of eye contact, how to develop inquisitive questions, coming to the feet, learning from somebody else, being inquisitive. All those things are something that my generation, the millennials, desperately need, and that can be put on display in a reverse mentoring role. So there's a lot of power in using reverse mentoring. But it doesn't just have to be one-to-one. There's a lot of different ways to kind of enhance, or to use this idea of reverse mentoring. So let me give you some other examples to stretch your thinking a little bit. At Burberry, Angela Arendts, who was the ex-CEO of Burberry, now I believe she heads up the head of retail at Apple. She created the Strategic Innovation Council, where millennials met to innovate the company's future. So she created a group that was only for the emerging generation, and their whole goal was to innovate for the company's future. And they met once a quarter, and they would report up to Chris Bailey, who's now the CEO of Burberry, and they got tons of transformative ideas and new ways to go to market with certain products from that group. So it's a type of reverse mentoring that they implemented. Aetna has a generational employee resource group that enables each generation to learn from other generations. So employees resource group is just a group of employees, and anybody's welcome to join these. They're inclusive groups. And they put on different events talking about different generational aspects, much like these events are. So take advantage of rubbing shoulders with other generations, again, so we can begin to understand the different values, behaviors, expectations. And lastly, Bacardi has a Rising Stars program that develops emerging leaders and encourages them to disrupt the company from the inside out. So a lot of organizations have these programs that develop the emerging generations, but for Bacardi, they're intentional about empowering and encouraging this generation to disrupt the organization, rethink it. Hey, if we launched our business today in 2017, what would it look like? What do we need to do differently? And so that's a really important aspect in today's exponential times. All right, we're going to our 5th and final category. So if you haven't got a question right, this is your last opportunity. What percent of millennials wish they could have greater opportunity to start and finish work at the times they choose? All right, no one's taking the 50% bait. That's probably good. All right. In the interest of time, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. The correct answer is 88%. Congratulations, 77% of you. Oh, some of you have officially checked out. All right, so this is our last category. Hang with me, and then we'll get to some questions. Work. Each generation views work very differently. Let's look at what those are. Builders, they view work as responsibilities. Boomers, a place. Gen X, a means to an end. And millennials see it as a vehicle to gain new skills, a vehicle to perhaps travel the world. Their view of work, builders see it as a lifer, boomers are defined by it, Gen X, a tool, millennials fulfilling. And lastly, their attitude, builders will tell you this, you're lucky to have a job, right? That's what they'll tell you. Loyalty is rewarded, Gen X work hard, play hard, and millennials work smart. They're gonna lean into their high-tech and hyper-connected upbringing to find more efficient and effective ways to work. So let me give you one example of how this different approach or view of career is playing out. So it was about a year ago, I was giving a talk to a group of about 200 or 300 folks. And it was in the Q&A session, and I was helping a gentleman in the front row with a question, and I ended my question with this comment. I said, because if not, your millennial employee will use LinkedIn to find a new job by lunch. I was really wanting to put an exclamation mark after my response and really kind of challenge him that, hey, this is a generation that has high expectations. When I said that line to the individual in the audience that day, it was as if I had planted a millennial employee like in the back of the room. Because on cue, this brave young woman shouts out. So I said, they'll go on LinkedIn to find a new job by lunch. She shouts out, why wait until lunch? And it epitomized this generation. I mean, I couldn't make this stuff up, right? And it baffled, the crowd was silent. They're all thinking, and then they all started chuckling just like you guys did because they started to make the connection that, we live in different times. You and I are empowered consumers now, aren't we? We can go into a grocery store and we can pull out our mobile device and we can price check right there in the aisle, can't we? Because we are now living in a connected world and all of us have a super computer in our pockets. Well, just like you and I are empowered consumers now, we're now also empowered employees. And for the emerging generation who are digital natives, they have no problem if I'm dissatisfied at work, if I feel like I'm disengaged at work, I'm a finger swipe away from finding another job. And so the game has changed. Exponential times, today's hyper-connected world is keeping us accountable, right? To deliver really great experiences for our students and employees, now more than ever. And it's kind of like, here's a good way to make this connection. Well, I'll save that maybe for Gen Z because I don't want to get to questions. So bottom line on this, mobile technology and ubiquitous connectivity have empowered the next generation. So here's a strategy for work. Enhance the employer-student experience. Enhance the employer-student experience. So what do I mean by this? Enhancing the employer-student experience, it's all about the impact an organization's processes, policies, perks, and programs have on its people. And the goal of this is to create organizations or classrooms where people want, not need, to show up. Exponential times are keeping us accountable, so we have to deliver effortless and seamless experiences to this emerging generation. I was talking with Tim Tracy before we came on. I'm pulling up what's really top of mind for him is accessibility, affordability, and accountability. And he was saying these emerging generations, they want more for less, right? It's not because necessarily they're entitled. There is some of that happening, but it's because they live in a new reality now, right? My kids won't know a world where they can't tap a slab of glass and have something delivered to their front door. No, by the way, when I was giving that example, I said homes. Just that this is a random side note. Did you know you can buy homes on Amazon now? You can go onto Amazon and you can buy a tiny home, and they will deliver it to your front door. How about that? I think it's like $30,000, and it comes in like one of those huge shipping crates, and it's like a fully assembled home. So do with that what you will. I think the shipping costs are like $3,700, so be careful. Don't get razzed on the shipping costs. All right, so let's talk. Let me zero in on this idea of employer-student experience. So think of yourselves as consumers, right? Your own experience. Let's say you were going to buy a new laptop. When you purchase that laptop, as a consumer, your satisfaction is high and it goes down over time because the newness wears off. There might be another model that comes out. It might just start to get, dated or whatever it might be. But rather, compare it with when you buy an experience. That could be a vacation or a concert. When you buy an experience, your satisfaction starts lower and it goes up over time. The anticipation of the event increases satisfaction. When you have the event, great satisfaction. And then afterwards, you have photos, memories that you can share with family and friends, so satisfaction continues to rise. So that's true of you and me as consumers, right? Well, if you compare that to the work world, the same thing happens. If you're a material employer, where you view your employees as cogs in the wheel, or perhaps you maybe oversold the job in the recruiting process, and now the employee is inside thinking, this is it? Like I thought this was going to be what they told me in the recruiting process. That would be considered like a material employer, right? Satisfaction is going down over time. Versus if you focus on the employee or student experience, it's going to go up over time, right? We have to hyper-focus on delivering those effortless and seamless experiences because they expect it. So bottom line here, we have to shift employees and students' relationship with work from feeling like a material purchase to an experiential purchase. Let me give you a couple examples of how this is playing out. Airbnb has an appointed chief employee experience officer where the goal is to drive the company's health and happiness. Adobe's customer and employee experience organization focuses on the people who are essential to Adobe's business, their customers, and their employees. So folks that were so focused on their customer satisfaction are redirecting a lot of that energy and time into figuring out how do we create a great employee experience. And lastly, this is my favorite, Taco Bell is Uberizing their frontline employee experience through an internal app. So let me explain this one because I think it's really interesting. So if I'm a trained Taco Bell employee and I work inside one of their restaurants and I'm not scheduled to work today because I was going to hang out with some friends, but let's say those friends canceled on me and I now have some free time, I can pull up the Taco Bell app and I can look at all of the stores that are in my area that need some extra help that day. And I can click on that store and I can go to work and put in, during a busy lunchtime hour, and I can put in 2, 3, 4 hours of work. When I'm done, I check out and that's it. And I get paid a premium for putting in that extra kind of on-demand work. So it's kind of like Uber, right? To where I can see all of the people that need a ride and I can, choose whatever time I wanted to give a ride or whatever. So Taco Bell is understanding that this generation is looking at the world differently. They have different expectations, they have different behaviors. There's different things that are more native to them and they're leaning into it. And they're creating a tremendous employee experience. I mean, who wouldn't want that control of when and where they work, right? And so focusing on the employee or student experience has indirect impacts as well. So take Taco Bell, for example. Because they've created such a great employee experience, they're now delivering a better experience for their customers as well. Because we've all been to a restaurant where it's been understaffed, and that's not an exciting or great experience, right? So if we focus on the employee or student experience, there's going to be a lot of indirect benefit as well. All right, so that was the 5 strategies. So we're going to go into some Q&A. We've got time to cover some of your questions, but don't forget, there's my email. It's my initials, rj@ryan-jenkins.com. Any questions you have, I want to do the best I can to answer those. And then don't forget about that link where there's a ton of bonus material, ryan-jenkins.com/UK, and you can get all these slides there for you as well. All of the session that I'm going to do later today too, that presentation can be found there as well. And then we only covered 5 strategies, but if you're hungry for more, you can go to this link, ryan-jenkins.com/manual, and that'll actually redirect you to Amazon. And that's where our latest book is. There's 47 strategies on how to manage, develop, and engage millennials. So if you are a millennial manager or leader, this is a tremendous resource as well. It's all about how do we be an effective 21st century leader. And pretty much any challenge you've had over the 5-6 years that we've been working with audiences, we've boiled it all down to 47. And there's a digital and physical copies at that link. Questions. And I don't know if we'll need to run a mic. I think we'll be able to hear one another. So I don't think we need to run a mic, but I can run up if we need to. What questions might you have? Nailed it. I nailed it. We can go and talk about generations. We can talk about Generation Z if you want. We can talk more about millennials. Yes. Right. So what did you do in that aspect? Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's a reality, right? And so, so the scenario, if I can summarize it, was you were in a recruiting situation to where you were reaching out to candidates and some of them didn't have their voicemail set up at all. So he actually literally couldn't leave a voicemail. And so I asked him, what did he do after that? And you said you just moved on to the next. So yeah, I mean, that's a reality. And so, every generation we have to be more flexible in our communication channels. And so we need to be open to communicating in any form or fashion. So I think there's, before these students leave, I mean, we should be coaching them on, using email, using phone, whatever it might be. We need to be open to that because we're not sure who's on the other end and what their communication preference might be. So absolutely. Yeah, that was a good comment. Another question up here. Yes. Did everyone hear that? I'll summarize it if I can. So how good are they at discerning real news versus fake news, I guess would be a good summary. I would say millennials are better at it because they've been poking at it for a long time. I mean, we were the ones that were on using, going on Wikipedia or using the internet to write our research papers, right? And then it was teachers that began copying that content, putting it into Google to see if it was actually legitimate, right? So we've kind of fumbled ourselves away through it, and I think we're a little bit more versed in discerning what's right or wrong, or how do we critically think through some of these issues. But you bring up a good point, and that is we need to help the emerging Generation Z really think about this because it's so easy to create a vacuum of your own perspectives and thoughts and opinions. And so we really need to help them to discern certain information, critically think, go find multiple sources, different viewpoints, and critically think through it. Because for them, it's easy for them to just like all of the same pages that have the same views and perspectives and just think that is what it is and not essentially have that unconscious bias, right? So we need to help them with that. So I think, universities are in a really good spot to help them through that. And so we've just got to be really hyper-focused on that. I don't have the answer on how we do that, but I just think we need to be aware of it so that we can lead, teach, and manage around it. Do you have a comment on that? Yeah. I mean, that's why unconscious bias is such a important topic, because it's human nature for us to go towards ideas, people, places that are familiar, right? We just naturally go there. So it's unnatural for us to go explore, contrasting views and et cetera. So it takes influential people guiding us through that process, encouraging us to go find those different experiences and perspectives to really grow through it. But it's just way too easy to create your own vacuum of your own information and really kind of create your own island these days. So yes, I think that's something we can all get behind and feel like we can help this next generation with. Yes, question up here. Yep. Uh-huh. Yeah, good point. I get the same question a lot in the industry too, right? I'm getting the same question, and the question is kind of, why are we trying to learn so much about them and change for them, and are they trying to adapt or change for us? And I think the best leaders out there are servant leaders that meet the people where they're at. It's my belief you've got to touch a heart before you can ask for a hand. And so oftentimes we have to meet them where they're at. And oftentimes it's a maturity thing as well, right? They're not going to quite think outside their own shoes until perhaps they have children of their own or they're a little bit more established in their careers. And so it's really up to us to model what it's like to actually learn about somebody else and to connect, cater, pivot, to really meet them where they're at. And I think now more than ever, there's alternatives, right? There's more and more alternatives to education. There's more and more ways that they can explore to where if they're in somewhere that feels analog, outdated, irrelevant, then there's more alternatives than ever before for them to just jump ship. So it's the exponential times that has changed that role forever, right? So if I'm an organization, I can't just continue to pull the wool over my employees' eyes because there's more exposure and everything else now. So they're now empowered to go somewhere else if I can't deliver for them. So the dynamics have shifted a little bit, certainly. And certainly these emerging generations are a lot more vocal. They're demanding a lot of things that hasn't been normal in the past. So I think finding a balance is really key, right? I don't think you want to, throw away strategies that have worked in the past, but at the same time, start challenging some of your legacy thinking or legacy processes, and start rethinking how could it be better. Because there's more alternatives, other campuses out there that are rethinking that. So that's the crux of it. So I don't want us to lose ourselves in thinking we have to bend over backwards for this emerging generation. But now more than ever, we need to be thinking about how do we innovate and how do we continually move forward. Hopefully that's helpful. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Sure. So folks in the back that might have not heard that, your comment was, and keep me honest here, is it really centered around respect, right? And you can respect the other individual by meeting them halfway or serving them to some capacity. And I guess the ultimate goal is to have them identify that or see that display of respect and perhaps reciprocate it or hopefully reciprocate it. But that's a good point. It is kind of centered around respect. Good dialogue. Yes. Yeah. Right. And they would be running into light posts and everything else, right? Sure. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Can everyone hear that in the back? Okay, there's really good acoustics in here, so hopefully that's the case. Yes, so bottom line, these are addicted, right? We get a hit of dopamine every time this thing lights up, our brain goes, ooh, right? Every ding, every whistle, every vibration is firing dopamine in our brains. So of course, yes, it's addicting. The question is, though, is denying it or trying to, put it away, is that the answer? I think we'd all agree that's not the answer either. And I'm battling this right now with my young children at home. When do I introduce technology to them? And, my 2.5-year-old, she's a whiz, right? Whenever we do give her our device, it seems like it was like built for her. She's crazy. And so it's imprinting her brain in a different way. So yes, they are addicting. But I think all of us are just fumbling teenagers as it relates to technology. We're still trying to figure it out, right? This is pretty new, right? 2007 is when the first iPhone or first smartphone in the version of iPhone came out, and now all of us are more in front of the screen than we probably want to admit. And so we're all still trying to figure out what this means. How do we, even if you have it face down in a restaurant and it's between you and someone else that you're trying to talk to, it's an invisible barrier, isn't it? There's always something in the back of your head like, you're essentially saying that whatever comes up on here is going to be more important than what you're saying. So I think we're all still trying to figure it out. Moving forward, though, this eventually will go away, and I think we're going to get back more to humanity. So in the future, the Internet of Things, right, is around the corner. So this eventually is just, there's going to be more technology than ever before, but it's going to be integrated into everything, right? Our clothes will be smart. These rooms will be smart. Buildings, streets, everything's going to be smart and emitting all kinds of data. And so the hope is that it'll actually get us to pick our heads up because it's not even here anymore. And it'll hopefully just be a good add-on to conversations. It'll keep us safer on the roads, et cetera. Or it could even be worse to where I'm talking to you and I can see your Twitter feed and your Facebook feed because I have smart contacts in, right? So be wary of that as well. So I think we're still trying to figure it out. The Generation Z, and we'll talk more about this in the afternoon section, I think they're the first generation that's well equipped to find the right balance between when do we use this and when do we put it away and have a human connection. Because this is a generation, actually I was speaking at another university 2 weeks ago, and I asked the students in the room, there's 300 first-year students, so it was all Generation Z, and I asked them that same question that I asked you guys, what's going to be your preferred method of communication at work? What do you think the top response for Generation Z was when I asked them that question? Face-to-face. 72% said face-to-face. So I think they've had a front row seat. They've read all the studies that you're mentioning, that it's a challenge, and we're all still trying to figure it out. I think we all want more humanity, but we all still want connection. We want the information because we're empowered now. But this emerging generation, they know, hey, I've got to do more face-to-face. Now that face-to-face, though, also could mean I want more face-to-face connection, but it's virtual. So I want to talk to you live via Skype, FaceTime, whatever it might be. But I still think they're doing more and more of that, and they're getting some of the social cues that perhaps millennials missed out on, right? We're seeing the face, we can empathize, whatever else it might be. So I think this next generation, they're going to start unpacking, really figuring out how do we have the right balance with technology. Because with my kids, I'm always telling my wife, this is the remote control to their life. This is the lens in which they're going to interact with the world, so I want them to be equipped. But her, on the other side, is thinking, yeah, but we also need to make sure that they're able to empathize, sympathize with people, getting social cues from facial expressions, et cetera. So I get the conversation, and so I think we all have to kind of work together, keep each other accountable to find the right balance. And the last thing I'll say too, this is kind of a good example of how I think this is going to play out. More technology hopefully is going to lead to more humanity. About earlier this year, I was speaking at a conference, and the gentleman before me was talking about, it was a healthcare conference, and he was talking about telemedicine. So telemedicine is essentially, basically having some, artificial intelligence that helps diagnose or serves a patient. And so he was saying eventually that some of these doctors will have an earpiece in that can actually more accurately diagnose a cough than a real doctor could. So they're having this earpiece in, and that cough can recognize what that patient needs, and it can then whisper into the ear of the doctor and say, this is how you should treat this patient. So that's a good sense of how more technology can serve the patient. And after that, after the gentleman spoke, afterwards I followed up with him and I said, so how do you see the role of a doctor changing now with that technology? And his thought, and I agree, this is my thought too, is that because there's more technology now, the doctor, his role, it's essentially like we're going back into time when doctors could really empathize and spend genuine time with their patients. Now that we have the technology that can diagnose it right away and give us the right treatment, the doctors can now empathize, show sympathy with a patient. So get back to the human element that only we can do and AI and robots can't do. So again, I think that's the long term of it as well, and hopefully we can stay on the right track. There's a lot of leaders out there that are trying to make sure we're going to be good stewards of AI, because there could be a potential lot of pitfalls, but there also could be a lot of really exciting opportunities where we could find more humanity than we ever had before. That was a long answer, but hopefully that was helpful. Let me check the time. Any more questions? One or two maybe? Yeah, up here. Yes, so labor jobs, trade work. I think I do a lot of work in that space with a lot of customers and clients, and it's a struggle, right? It's why would I want to go work outside in the hot or the cold when I could, go inside or use a mobile device and work somewhere nice, or be remote somewhere nice and work for a company that's not based where I live. So there's a lot of options out there. And so a lot of organizations are trying to focus on what we talked about there, the employee experience. How do we make it such a great experience that they want to come work for this and they want to pursue something, a dirty job or something in the labor market. So for example, recently had a conversation with the chief culture officer of a company called Power Design. So they do a lot of work in the electrical space. So they work with a lot of electricians and have a lot of folks that are in that field. And they're hyper-focused on development. They think we just want to give them as much development and skills that they can't find anywhere else. And we just want to create a great work environment where they can continue to work on their craft, but also learn about anything else that they want. So the organizations are putting more of the burden on them to really create this experience for folks like that. And they believe, and I think I'm with them, is they think that's what's going to help folks get attracted to that field or that occupation and to stay there as well and tell all their friends about it as well. So yeah, we have to work harder to make those jobs look sexy, and also to not think that a robot's going to take it in the next 5 years. One more question, then I have a last clip to show you with a closing comment. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot smarter and more educated people in this space that debate this all the time, right? How much is AI and robotics going to disrupt jobs? And depending on who you talk to, it's really doom and gloom, and the other side, it's going to take forever for it to change. The best example I heard someone talk about the other day was ATMs. When ATMs came out, everyone thought, bank branches are going to go under. Like, you're never going to see an actual physical bank branch. But that never happened, right? I mean, there's still a lot of bank branches, and ATMs have been around forever. So it's really hard for us to future cast or really predict what's going to happen, especially in the labor market. But I think at some point, robots will do the work that we don't want to do as humans. And I think the 9 to 5 is going to be challenged. And I think the idea of work and career is going to shift. But I think that's a long ways down the road. But I still think it's an important conversation to have, no doubt. All right, let me wrap up with a really hilarious clip. And then I'm going to end with a closing thought. So take a look.
Proud of you, son. GE. Manufacturer.
Well, that's why I dug this out for you.
It's your grandpappy's hammer, and he would have wanted you to have it.
It meant a lot to him.
Yes, GE makes powerful machines, but I'll be writing the code that will allow those machines to share information with each other. I'll be changing the way the world...
You can't pick it up, can you? Go ahead. You can't lift the hammer.
It's okay, though. You're going to change the world.
This is always how we've done it mindset is a slippery slope to irrelevance. Irrelevance for your students, irrelevance for your employees. And so now more than ever, we have to prioritize why over the way. So if you think about GE in that last clip, if GE prioritized the way, so stated differently, marry the mission of the organization, but only date the approach, because the approach is changing very rapidly, right? So if GE was focused on the way, well, they'd still be having all their new hires swing a hammer, right? And that they would be missing out on the exponential output that coding machine to machines could bring and the emerging generation would bring with them. So I leave you with that it's really important that all of us, we don't ask, nor should we want the emerging generations to think, to work and or learn like previous generations did. Instead, we need to be encouraging, equipping them to find new frontiers of work and to explore what it means to learn and be educated in the 21st century. Thanks for having me, y'all. Appreciate it. That was helpful. Thank you.
Right, just a small, oh, we go. just a small token of our appreciation for your great keynote this morning, and a little bit of Kentucky to take back to Atlanta with you. Our next session begins at 10:50 at the Boone Center. Thank you for coming out in the rain. We hope to see you at the Boone Center.